evening and welcome. My name is Sean Yo, and I'll be your moderator for the evening. Tonight, we're at the third of the Green Party of Ontario platform town halls. Tonight, our topic is combating systemic racism. For an optimal experience, we recommend that you keep speaker view. We'll make sure that the camera's on the right person. Also, please note that this town hall is being recorded. So thank you so much for joining us tonight. And as we begin, I'm going to start off with a land acknowledgement. As we open our space and time together tonight, I invite you to join me in acknowledging that we meet on the traditional territory and unceded Indigenous lands here and across Ontario. Land acknowledgements are a practice that I've been able to participate in for many years now. And I think that's really important because combating systemic racism, systemic change is a long and hard process. It doesn't mean it's not urgent, but it does mean that it's going to take a long time and a lot of repetition in my experience. So I'm really very committed to land acknowledgement practices, but they can't stand still. I believe that we walk together along a path of reconciliation, and that means that we must be walking and always making forward progress. We need to acknowledge that the land cannot stand still either. Land acknowledgements are not a box to be checked or a to-do to be crossed off, a video to be played. They must be personal, authentic, real, and living. So tonight I join you from land which was part of the Between the Lakes Purchase Treaty, and that's the land where I pretty much do all my work living and playing. I've read this treaty and I really encourage you to go and find treaties, your treaty to read as well. I think that if we as Canadians spent time to read the treaties for our land, especially the one for where we live, I think we'd be making a meaningful next step in reconciliation, which would help us continue this journey together. I'll post a link to a Ontario provincial website with more information about treaty information. And so from the traditional territories and unceded lands of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and the Attawandaron, which is the current territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, I invite you to reflect that this is dish with one spoon territory, where we have an agreement that this land is a shared bowl and there's one spoon for all of us. We must ensure that shared bowl is never empty. As we work towards a better future for all people in Canada, between communities, between provinces, and between nations, we acknowledge the importance of bringing Indigenous teachings, such as the principle of 7 generations, to our leadership and governance. This is the principle that as we live our lives and build our communities, we must ensure we are planning not only for today and not only for tomorrow, but for the next 7 generations in terms of the land, all of our people, in all of our communities, excluding none. So thank you so much. And now this event, I want to make sure that you know that this event is all about the Green Party of Ontario, understanding your concerns about combating systemic racism and helping us get feedback to inform our platform. As you may know, in 1 year, June 2nd, we're going to be at the polls to elect our provincial government. So that election's coming up, and this is the part of the process of the Green Party of Ontario preparing for that. We have a really great panel for you this evening, and we have time for some questions and answers later on, where we'll take questions from you. Before we get started with the main part of this, I just want to go over some housekeeping and some of our house rules. We ask that everyone remain on mute and only unmute when you're speaking or called upon. And we really appreciate if you had your correct name displayed on Zoom as well. We'll be using the polling feature to help guide our discussion. So when prompted, we'd really appreciate it if you would participate in the poll so we can hear from you. We'll be using the raise hand function when Mike asks the audience questions. That'll be an opportunity for you to, if you'd like, turn on your camera and unmute your mic and answer Mike's questions at that time. During the Q&A section, we'll have an opportunity for you to put your questions in chat, and we'll work as a team to bring those questions. We're calling into the town hall if we have any today. Not all those features will be available, unfortunately, but we'll do our best to include you as time allows. On a very important note, I want to be sure that everyone's hearing that today our town hall is a safer space for all guests and speakers. Our equity officer is online with us today, Ranju. There's zero tolerance for hate, abusive, or discriminatory language or harassment at tonight's town hall. We ask that everyone participate with respect with one another and in this spirit of community. So before we get started with our speakers, we're going to do one poll. This is going to give us a chance to hear from you, but also to make sure everyone has a chance to know what the polls look like. So our first question, which we're going to put up on the screen right now, is when you think about systemic racism in Ontario today, what are the top 3 issues that worry you? So I'm going to go ahead and answer this poll too. Let's all take a moment and just you can click up to 3 options. All right, well, I've put in my answers. And so I'd like to thank you for participating in the poll. And now, finally, I'm going to turn the spotlight over to Mike Schreiner, leader of the Green Party of Ontario, who will be introducing our special guests and discuss our reactions to the first poll. Hi, Mike.
Thanks, Sean, and good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. And a big shout out to the GPO team and the 4 Global Group who've helped us organize tonight's event. And I really want to say thank you to everyone who's participating. It's important that we hear your voice as we build our platform. And tonight's discussion about combating systemic racism, I think it's so vital to what the Green Party wants to talk about in the next election. And your input in developing that platform is critical. I also believe it is vital that we consult experts as we develop the platform. And so what I've really enjoyed about our town hall series tonight and throughout all of our meetings is that we're combining experts, and we have 2 experts joining us tonight, along with people across the province participating and sharing their own experiences. And that intersection, I think, between sort of grassroots input and expert input, I think is so vital. So I'm really honored. We have 2 fantastic panelists tonight joining us. And the first I'd like to introduce is Velma Morgan, who is the chair of Operation Black Vote Canada. Velma is also a teacher and an educator and somebody who has been a long time organizer and activist for gender and racial diversity in politics and inclusion. And I'd also like to introduce and welcome Sundeep Hans, who is the Director of Equity, Diversity and Inclusion, University of Fraser Valley, and is also the Director of Strategy for Vision Brampton, and has been a diversity, equity, and inclusion strategist for over 12 years. And so I know both of you are incredibly busy. And so I want to thank you both for taking the time to join us tonight. And I always say that if you really want insights, talk to people who are incredibly busy. And so both of you are so active in your communities. And so thank you for taking the time. Sean, I think, are you going to bring the poll results up for us? And so we can do a quick reaction to them.
And you know what, we have some people on the phone, and it would suggest that we read, I'm not going to read all of them, but I'm going to go over some of the top issues here. 57% policing, carding, criminal justice system. Then I see, I think, a tie at 43% each, lack of representation among elected officials, racism in school, other very high ranked ones, lack of understanding by people of systemic issues that hinder opportunity and success for racialized groups. And I'll also mention racism in healthcare.
Great, thanks for that, Sean. And maybe I'll just give a quick reaction, and then I'll ask Velma and Sundeep for your reaction. So I'm not surprised that policing, carding, criminal justice issues, and the systemic racism that we've seen in our criminal justice system is ranked number 1. Not only is it the lived experience for many members of the BIPOC community, but also it's been an issue talked a lot about over the last year, especially since the murder of George Floyd. But also I think the fact that lack of representation among elected officials, very pertinent to tonight's conversation, and the need to have diversity, not only in candidates, but throughout all of politics. So staff, policy analysts, communication support, etc., I think is really important. And we've certainly seen a number of incidents of systemic racism, both in our school system and in our economy and workplaces. And I think COVID has especially highlighted that. So Velma, do you want to start with your reaction?
Yes, thank you for having me. Before I start, I just want to do my own land acknowledgement since we're on different territories. So I'm standing on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississauga of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat people, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. I also acknowledge Treaty 13 with the Mississauga of the Credit that covers Toronto. I also acknowledge all treaty peoples, including those who came here as settlers, as migrants, either in this generation or generation past, and those of us who came here involuntarily, particularly first of all, impacted Africans brought here as a result of the transatlantic slave trade and slavery. Today, I pay tribute to those ancestors of African origin and descent. Thank you. So thank you for having me here to discuss this very important topic, especially for me. I am not surprised that policing, carding, criminal justice has 57%, simply because that's what's been in the media over the past couple of years, but in particular the last year because of George Floyd and the Black Lives Movement and the defunding the police. But I think for me, they're all equally important. I couldn't really decide on which one would be number one for me, number two, number three, because they're all equally important. As a Black person in Ontario and Canada, we are, there's systemic racism runs throughout. So, you know, we've seen the numbers in healthcare. We know that most of us are in precarious types of jobs. We understand that, you know, children in the school system are suspended often for lesser offenses. We know that in housing, we're discriminated against. So for me, it was very hard to decide which one would be number one, but I totally understand why policing and carding would be number one in this poll.
Yeah, Sundeep, what was your reaction?
Thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me here. And like Velma, I'd like to do my own land acknowledgement because I'm also on a different territory. So I respectfully acknowledge that as a Bramptonian, I'm a settler on the land and territory that is the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit, Anishinaabe, Huron-Wendat, Haudenosaunee, Ojibwe, Chippewa, and Métis people. This territory in particular is covered by the Upper Canada Treaty, specifically Treaty 19 and 13A. I also want to recognize that on these territories, African peoples were forcibly displanted from lands and enslaved here. Their bodies and labor exploited to enrich colonial empires and subsequent governments and people. And also this past year and a half, my own connection to the land and the connection of my family to the land in Punjab region with the farmers protest, it's just our connection to the land has just been brought to the forefront. So when I do a land acknowledgement, I'm very mindful of what it is that I'm acknowledging. The people were here before I got here, and I've thrived on land that was stolen. It's resonated with me much more this past year than ever before. And I'm someone who is in this work, in this space. So I think there's always room for learning. Like Velma, I also it was difficult for me to select. I'm not surprised by the results either. Given my just work experience, healthcare is where I've spent predominantly most of my life, health equity. So that one stood out to me and I checked it. I also I marked the racism within school systems. Those two areas, because folks are most vulnerable when we're going to seek help in a hospital system, and children are most vulnerable when they're coming into the spaces that should be safe for them to learn, to grow, to thrive. The third one I selected was, I think, a contributing factor for all, which is just generally folks are not aware of the systemic inequities that exist. So it's the last selection there. I'm not surprised that the weight has been given to the policing or the justice system piece, given the year that we've had. So yeah, that's where I'm at as well.
Great, thanks for that. And before we open up to audience questions, I'm hoping that I can ask a few questions. And so I want to start by saying that you know, the COVID pandemic has put a stronger lens and highlight on issues of systemic racism and systemic inequities in our society. And I remember during the first wave, there was a lot of talk about we're all in this together. And certainly that sentiment was something that strongly resonated with me, but then it became quickly clear that a disproportionate number of COVID cases were people from racialized communities. I think in Toronto, 83%, even though represents half the population. Sundeep, I think of your home community of Brampton, and it quickly became clear that Peel region in general and Brampton in particular bore a disproportionate burden of the pandemic. Again, many racialized workers who could not work from home had to go into work. The fact that so many of our frontline healthcare providers, and I'm thinking in particular of personal support workers, yesterday or today actually is PSW Day, and so many PSWs are women and women of color, and who were sent into unsafe workplaces in very precarious situations, way underpaid, and the list goes on and on and on. I've only hit a few of them. And so I'm curious, and I'll start with you this time, Sundeep. How do you think COVID has exposed and intensified systemic racism? And what can government do to address this issue?
Thank you for that question. It's something that I've spent my weekends this past year. I've been casual staff with William Wilson Health System. I'm still tethered to the hospital system, so very, despite my new roles, I've been tethered there. Casual staff, but in the midst of a pandemic, have been called in. So every single weekend for this past entire year, up until November, I've been at the hospital. So seeing this on the front lines of how COVID has patterned very specifically, and which groups COVID has struck disproportionately and why. But I've been in healthcare, as I've said, most of my life, and the disproportionate underfunding when it comes to healthcare is a contributing factor to how COVID is patterning equities and exacerbated the inequities that have always existed. I've been experiencing inequities. For them, this was not a surprise. For them, they already knew things were inequitable. What COVID has done is laid it bare for everyone else. What it's done for folks who have been experiencing or have been made most vulnerable is that their reality has worsened because of COVID. So folks who are living in long-term care homes, the situation was already pretty bad. It was exacerbated by the pandemic. Folks who have been living in Brampton, my home city, we're disproportionately underfunded. Public health, healthcare, education, you name it, disproportionately underfunded. So when COVID hit, and we are then negatively portrayed in the media as, oh, hotspot, Brampton hotspot, and then securitized, we're going to charge, fines for folks who are outside and about. And what we're seeing is truck drivers who have to cross the border every day to come, for their livelihoods. They're the ones who are showing up. And then they live in intergenerational homes. So where there's multi-generations living in one home, international students living in one home. Why COVID has patterned this way is because of the way we have planned through policy, through procedure, and how we, via policy and procedure, have excluded certain groups. There's exclusion built into how we do things. And it existed pre-pandemic. It's been exacerbated by the pandemic. I hope that answers that.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. Much appreciated. And Velma, I wondered your thoughts on that question.
So I echo what Sundeep said. We've been talking about disparity for years. We've been talking about the systemic racism. We've been talking about the disproportionate of everything that we're seeing physically now. And I think now people are saying, oh, okay, so I guess they weren't exaggerating or not telling the truth. And it's interesting, people are in shock. People can't believe it. And this has been going on for years and years and years, and no one believed us. So I think, it has brought out Ontario's little dark secret, or Canada's dark secret, and how they treat racialized, marginalized people. The world is seeing how that we're treated. We've seen how many people die in long-term care facilities. We've seen children not being doing their work on their mom's iPhone because they don't have a tablet, and they're not being provided one. We've seen ones not being able to do work because they don't have internet. So we're just brought to light all the disparities that's in our society through COVID.
Yeah, thanks for that. I was sort of reflecting on what both of you said, and I think the debate in the Ontario legislature over the last few weeks has just highlighted this so much for me, is the inequity in the decision by the current government not to focus on workplace safety, like paid sick days, ventilation, mandating PPE, stronger inspections, the list goes on, but then to close outdoor activities. And I'm thinking, so the very people who have to go into work are the same people who live in high-rise rental apartment buildings, and their children don't have access to a backyard or a front yard oftentimes. So you're denying them access to the outdoors that the health experts say are safe, but requiring workers to go into vulnerable workplaces without supports for them. And so anyway, I was especially thought about that in certain neighborhoods in Toronto and in Brampton in particular. So I appreciate both of your perspectives on that question.
In addition to that, you think all these, people that are in precarious jobs have to go to work. They have kids. Their kids are not in school. So who's taking care of their kids, right? So you have to think about, there are a lot of kids who are just home, and parents are at work, probably worried about their kids being home, because they need to go to work. They don't have the luxury of staying home, even if they're sick, because they only have 3 sick days now after a very long fight. They still have to go to work, and you wonder why there's a high transmission among certain demographics in certain workplaces, because they can't stay home. They can't afford to stay home, so they're dying at work.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Wilma, because and the 13-year-old, the youngest person to die of COVID, died in Brampton, from Brampton. That example of that reality that child went through and the family went through, it hit all of the inequities. When I speak about health equity, it hit all of the different inequities, and how it could have been different. How it could have been different. That just, I don't know, it still sits with me.
Yeah, no, such a tragic story, and you're so right, Sundeep. I'm going to shift to another question, and this time I think I'll direct it to Velma first.
Yeah.
So policing in Ontario has been under a lot of criticism for a number of years now, particularly from the Black Lives Matter movement and other movements for justice. But it's become particularly a more topic that's being discussed in the media in the last year, especially. And, I think of the Ontario Human Rights Commission report that came out that revealed that Black people are 3.7 times more likely to be charged by the police than the general population. I think of the fact that the Black people are overrepresented in like just driving charges and the whole talk about, driving while Black. I think of just the outcry of when the premier announced that karting would essentially be reinstated. And so but I think one thing that's come out of these conversations is conversations about how we can reimagine community safety. And so that's really what I wanted to ask you about is, how do we keep our community safe in a way that works for everyone, in a way that ensures justice for everyone, in a way that doesn't discriminate against Black, Indigenous, and people of color?
Right. That's a heavy topic. There's so many layers to it, right? So first of all, we know that all institutions in systems are racist. They were built on exclusion. So when you bring other people in, they don't have a mechanism of how to include people in. So, you know, having anti-racism training over and over and over again is just a Band-Aid situation. We need to look at the policies. We need to look at when a police does something wrong, and other police are afraid to call them out because they don't want to be ostracized. But when a police does something wrong, they need to be punished correctly. You know, it's not like a slap on the hand, or, you know, like in the United States, somebody was killed and the police officer said, oh, I took out the taser instead of, you know, I took out the gun instead of the taser. Oops, a mistake. You murdered somebody. You know, if I made a mistake in my classroom, I would be fired, right? So why is it police can make mistakes and still keep their jobs? So that's one thing. They need to putting something in place for discipline for police officers. But I also think we need to send out the right people when 911's called. So they need to triage it. They need to assess what's happening and send out the right people. So if somebody is if someone's in distress, then you need to send somebody out who's going to be able to deal with that person in distress. A lot of people in Black community, if they're in distress and they see the police officers coming, their distress goes even higher because there is this non-trust of the police based on everything that we've known, based on everything that's happened historically. So I think we need to decide, or we need to create a structure where we're going to send out the right people for the right call. So you wouldn't, I mean, when you send a police, if somebody is dying, the police shows up, they call the ambulance, right? So if somebody's in distress, you know, they need to call someone who's going to be able to de-escalate and basically calm that person down.
Thanks, Velma. Sorry, I put myself on mute because my dog started barking, and I didn't want my dog to interrupt you. Sundeep, your thoughts on that question?
I echo Wilma's thoughts that the question is so big, and it requires us to think so deep and think broad. As soon as we say systemic racism, it's such a huge topic because all of our systems interlink. Healthcare interlinks with the justice system interlinks with the education system. And to Wilma's point of being that these systems are by their very design exclusionary. So I'll use an example of being an able-bodied cisgendered woman. There's some aspects of my identity, so cisgendered and ableism, where I never have to think about that part of my identity because the world is designed for me. I can enter any building without any thought. If the elevator is broken, I don't consider the staircase, you know, maybe my outfit, I might have to consider that. But overall, it's something that it doesn't cross my mind. So I realize that other aspects of my identity, the areas where the systems have not been designed for that aspect of my identity, as being a woman coming into certain structures, being a woman of color going to other structures, and then seeing this reflected in other people's experience when they access healthcare, when these folks are accessing, when they're entering the education system. I can see the inequities. I can see where the system has the barrier. It's purposely there. It's how we built it. It's by design. So to say, how would we, you know, solve the policing piece within Brampton, 75% racialized folks, the securitization of Black and brown bodies, I see it visually. I see it, I've grown up seeing it. And it's global. We're looking at the local issue, but it's a global problem. So global systems all securitize Black and brown bodies. And if we look at if we're just talking about policing, to Wilma's point, looking to imagine a place, we want to increase or create a culture that is inclusive. We want to create a culture where our community is safe. That is a wish that all of us have, but all of us have different ways of how we will get that wish. Creating policies, reviewing current policies, looking for gaps, mitigating the gaps, finding the areas of exclusion, understanding the power. So the power dynamic, to be inclusive, we need to examine processes of exclusion in order for real systemic change. So that is across all levels. If we build up our education system to be more inclusive, that will then contribute to community safety. That will contribute to less securitization. If we build with mental health supports, that will build security within the community. If we, look and examine food deserts that exist within the GTA, areas where there's not healthy food available, 10-mile radius. And then we're saying, eat healthy so you don't have to do preventative measures so you don't have to battle chronic disease later in the future. All of these things are interlinked. In healthcare, we have the social determinants of health. We have that. And the social determinants of health are interlinked with all the different systems that make up our society. It's why I picked the third check mark, my third choice, that most folks don't understand systemic interlinking, that it's not to solve one thing, we can't just fix policing system and ta-da, it'll be fixed. It's how do we look at things broadly and interconnectedly, examine process of exclusion within each of the various systems, but then imagine new ways of innovating and collaborating across systems that we can then mitigate. To Velma's point, when we're calling, who do we call? Like, who else needs to be a part of that call, the community support call? I've seen it where folks, refugees to Canada, will not seek healthcare, traditional health modes of healthcare. They'll first go to the community organization, which speaks their language, which understands that I'm seeking mental health support, but I can't say I'm seeking mental health support because of the stigmatization associated with that. How do we bring in community supports? How do we bring in the lived experiences of people and have that at the decision-making table? Those are the processes of exclusion, even within our work, like the police. I'll use that example. We are doing recruitment. We want to recruit diversity, bring in the diversity. But as soon as you're recruited in, brothers in blue. We have to examine how we do things societally, like as a society.
So, just to your point in terms of systems being interlocking, there's this saying, education, school to prison pipeline, right? There's a stats that, the first time a young black person is introduced to the police is through the school system. So when you're, I think it's 12 years old, you do something wrong, the principal could call the police on you. Guess who gets called, which children get called the police on the most? Black boys. Right. So the first contact with the police is usually through the school system. That's something that we have to look at. Why are we calling the police on a 12-year-old? Whereas if another child does it, we call their mom to come pick them up.
Yeah, and I can say as a white man, you don't even recognize those systems of privilege that you've just described until start having conversations like this. And I remember the first time it hit me that it's like, oh my gosh, I never had to worry about that in school. Like when I acted out in school, my mom was called in. When I got pulled over by the police officer, there were jokes about, oh, my dad, when your dad and I were in high school, blah, 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 you can go on, just be, just all those systems of privilege of how it becomes so ingrained in those who the system is designed to work for, and for those the system is designed to work against, So I want to bring Sean back in, because I think we're going to ask another question and have a little audience participation. So I'm going to turn that over to you, Sean.
Yeah, so we're going to put up our next poll, and that's going to give us a little bit something to reflect on. But what we're going to do after the poll is Mike is going to ask our participants a question. So actually, hopefully a few of them. And when Mike asks those questions, you can just use the raise hand feature, which you can find on Zoom next to reactions, and I'll be able to call on people from there. So this poll is, what do you feel is the biggest barrier for BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, and people of color candidates running and or winning elections? All right. We'll just give that another moment. And just to remind you, when we ask you your questions, if you'd like to respond, we'd love your camera on and mic on, and under reactions, you can choose raise hand. All right, so let's take a look at the results of the poll. So there's not that many, not as many options this time, so I'm going to read them off. So the question was, what do you feel is the biggest barrier for BIPOC candidates running and or winning elections? And at 58%, lack of engagement from political parties, BIPOC communities, 53% racism, 45% money, 40% feelings that government political parties don't speak to you, 35% opportunity, and 28% being taken seriously. As someone who has the opportunity to work with many candidates or potential candidates, I can certainly say that everything on that list is highly relevant. But engagement with political parties, even those that are earnestly trying, is very challenging. The systemic barriers for BIPOC candidates are very considerable, and I certainly really appreciate and acknowledge the hard work the Green Party is doing, and also see the really significant work left that we have to do to get to the outcomes that will be just and equitable. Okay, Mike, did you want to talk a little bit about those responses before we go to our first person? And then ask your first question, please, Mike. Sorry.
Sure. Well, my first response to this is, yeah, you're right. I could have selected each one of these, but I would say that one thing that really speaks to me is that how can you feel engaged with a political party if you don't feel like that party speaks to you? And so the fact that those two I see as linked and represented a significant proportion of the responses. And then my next thought was, well, how much of that is driven by racism? Because that was a high as well. And then maybe this gets back to the previous conversations we've had about inequities in COVID and systems of discrimination and policing, is like, sometimes I'd say follow the money, and where people invest money and resources is usually where you start to see change in different outcomes. And so, yeah, very highly instructive responses. So thanks, everyone.
All right, Mike. So this is the part of the town hall where you get to ask our participants a question. So what's your first question, Mike?
Okay, so what I'm going to do three, Sean, just off.
Okay, fair enough.
Is that okay? That way people can just reflect on all of them in their comments and questions.
That sounds great.
And so you don't have to, you could do all three or one or the other or whatever. But so one is what in the world that you want. So imagine the world that you want. What does a truly equitable and inclusive and just society look like? The second one is, in the world you want, what does policing, or I might say community safety and well-being, look like? And what does, the third one, what does inclusive representation look like?
Thanks,
so
Mike.
if folks could think about those three in our engagement, that'd be great.
Absolutely. And I just really welcome, and I'm excited to have our participants have their voice be heard as part of tonight. Also, a gentle reminder that we keep things relatively short so we get as many voices participate as possible. So first up, I have Viola, and next Evan. Viola, go ahead. Do you want to unmute and share your voice?
I'll try. So I don't have much of a voice right now because I've had a cold, I hope. But anyway, I think that there's room to get to a place where we acknowledge that these systems are in place, that they exist, and that everyone knows that they exist. Because I've been to a lot of meetings around racism. I'm in Niagara, and we've had a number of meetings around racism in the school system. And I find that what happens at these meetings is they immediately become completely fractured, because people start arguing over what race they are, who has it worse, and we end up not talking about the problem itself, which is that there is a group of people who are doing things that are racist, who are causing problems for people, and they're not acknowledging that they know they're doing it. So it's like, I didn't know this was in place. And I'm like, okay, well, my first experience of racism was in kindergarten, when me and my cousin, who looks Black, and because we're mixed race, so he has darker skin, my other cousin has lighter skin, and we were with two white kids, Anyway, we did something wrong. We got in trouble. My cousin got expelled. I got suspended, and the 2 white kids got talked to and sent home. And I think those 2 white kids, as well as me, as well as my cousin, understood the structure when we were 6. So nobody can say in Canada that they don't understand that these structures exist. There's no way anymore to say that you don't know it's there. And I think that can be an excuse that gets used. So for me, I think that we need to get to a place where there's forced acknowledgement, where people can't say, I didn't know that that was happening anymore, because we know that it's there. For everyone, sorry, for everyone. So being mixed race, there was an advocacy. There is an advocacy for mixed race people. It's just, you know, if you're this race, you get this advocacy. If you're that race, you get that advocacy. If you're no race, you get 0 advocacy, and you're exposed to the same systems of racism. So anyway, that's my piece. I think we need to force acknowledgement, because if the racism is never acknowledged in the first place, you're never going to get to a place of ending it, if that makes any sense.
Sure thing. I'm going to invite our panelists to perhaps make a short response. Then we'll invite Evan to join and share his perspective.
I totally agree with you. As a teacher, you're correct. You know, as a 6-year-old, a 7-year-old, you're forced to understand that the structures were not built for you, based on the treatment that you receive from the school system. So, you know, again, we have all these trainings, and we go to all these trainings and we say the right things in the training, but when it comes to the actual action, we sort of revert back to, you know, if you are darker skinned, then you must be more dangerous. You know, you could have boys just, you know, as I say, being boys, and if you are Black, you can't just be a boy. You know, you are seen as a threat to the other kids around you. Black girls are seen as to be more mature beyond their age for some reason. So, you know, our little kids can't be little kids. They can't afford to make mistakes, because if they do, they get suspended and expelled, and eventually not kicked out of school, but they're pushed out of school. So I totally agree with you.
And thanks for sharing, Viola and Velma. I worked at the Waterloo Regional District School Board as the Equity and Inclusion Officer. So seeing some of the stuff that you just hit on at the high level, like, oh, we're doing all the trainings, seeing it all. When I selected the third piece, which was most folks don't understand systemic racism, I still hold that to be true. It's not about acknowledging whether racism exists or not, but most folks don't understand that racism exists, like interpersonal racism. Most folks stop right there, that I'm not racist, I have not done anything racist, and they don't understand the systemic structures and how interpersonal plus systemic equals structural racism is what we're seeing in society. If you just examine the interpersonal and you don't understand the systemic, then we'll never fix the structural. And then forget about the internalized, like the fourth piece of racism. We don't even get to that, the self-knowledge, the know thyself, sit with this, be uncomfortable. I hate the be uncomfortable with being uncomfortable. They'll get uncomfortable with being uncomfortable. People say that a lot. I'm starting to grow frustrated with that phrase, because it seems as if just sit with this uncomfort for fun. What we're really trying to say is lean into that discomfort so you can action. So it leads to action. Make that discomfort a catalyst for change. Then you get folks like, okay, let me look, let me read, let me discuss. So I agree with you, but I still hold that most folks don't understand racism, and they stop at the I'm not racist, and therefore and take away the conversation.
Yeah. I think because they think of a racist as the views that we see in the United States, right? The KKK, all those kinds of stuff. They have a vision of what a racist looks like, and not thinking about all the little subtleties, the microaggressions that that they exhibit or that we go through, and they don't call that racist.
Thanks so much. So I'm going to invite Evan to unmute his mic and make a brief comment. And from there, we're going to hear some responses, and then we're going to move on to broader Q&A from everyone in the chat box. So Evan, go ahead. Thanks so much.
Hi, thanks for setting this up. So yeah, a couple comments on the questions Mike asked there. The first was imagining what just society would look like. So if you look what we're currently living in. I'd say there's no doubt that although we pretend that there's equal opportunity for everyone to do what they want, right? There is quite a large element that is dependent on the income you're born into and also the race that you're born into. So if we want a just society, we're talking about that. We need to have basic rights to life guaranteed to everyone. So that means housing, that means education, that means healthcare. You know, we say we have universal healthcare, but it's not really that universal. The other thing is we say we live in a democratic society, but that's really only politically democratic. It's not economically democratic. There's no workers do not have an equal say in their workplace on what goes on, and that means economically that gets dominated by higher income, usually white males, based on our history. And because they have more power economically, they end up having more power politically as well. So if we're talking about a just society, those are the things we have to work on. And then the second thing you mentioned was what would you want policing to look like? So if we were focusing on the things I was talking about that I mentioned previously, I think you'd find you wouldn't end up dealing with as many police interactions. You know, there's been a lot of studies done where if you give communities socialized housing, crime goes way down. So if we're trying to talk about what just policing would look like, we first need to focus on taking money away from policing and putting it towards things that will decrease the necessity of policing.
Thanks, Evan. I really appreciate that. So I'll invite our panel to make some brief comments, then we'll move on to the Q&A section for tonight.
So I agree with you, Evan, but I wanted to go back to the poll about the biggest barrier for BIPOC candidates running. What we find is that one of the barriers is lack of information and transparency. So as a Black person wanting to run, they go into the website, and really the information on the website is designed for people who understands the political system, who understands how the process works. If you're not part of the system and you decide, well, you know, policing is an issue for me, I'm going to run because I want to be at the decision-making table to, you know, participate and offer my opinion. You go to the website, you wouldn't even know how to apply. You get the application, what happens next, right? So the people who usually get the nominations at provincial and federal levels are usually those people who are part of the system already. They're already there. They have people in the system that will help them. So that's what we found out. But also, we also know that provincially and federally, if a Black person runs in a winnable riding, they're going to win, right? And often the parties will, you know, recruit BIPOC people, particularly Black people, to run as a checkoff, right? So they run in non-winnable ridings. That doesn't do any service for us, because then, you know, you have people from the community saying, well, they've ran and they've lost, so maybe I shouldn't run either. But not analyzing and saying, it doesn't matter who would have run in that riding. This particular party was never going to win this particular riding anyway. So we recently sent a letter to all the party leaders. I know Mike got one, asking party leaders, we did it for federally and all the provinces that are having elections in the next year and a half, to run Black candidates in winnable ridings, to provide them with support, whether, you know, some parties have financial support, others have mentors, but to provide them with support, because if you do want to see the folks who are sitting in the House, the demographic change, that starts at the nomination. That starts with candidates. If you don't have Black candidates, you're not going to have Black MPs or Black MPPs.
I agree with you. I think that so the political structures, whether at municipal level, provincial level, federal level, are systems that have been, by their very design, exclusionary. So the transparent, as the director of strategy for Vision Brampton, the way Vision Brampton formed, the reason Vision Brampton formed was because we wanted to make an impact at the municipal level in Brampton for the Brampton election. We wanted to inform as many millennial voters, and I use this because I'm a millennial, but the older end millennial, Xennial, someone once told me, but to inform millennial voters and engage with the voters, civic engagement or civic inclusion, moving it from the onus on the voters to engage with the parties. That's not how things work. It's the folks who have the power of the knowledge of the information. The onus rests on them to engage and include those who have been disproportionately underrepresented, traditionally excluded from processes of politics. And it's why I belong to the Sikh Punjabi community. Our community has a history that predates Canada's formation of grassroots organization. And then because of colonization, we understood how to, politically get that we had the political acuity, political know-how. Immigrating here to Canada, understanding the structures of Canada, and then utilizing it, you see the results. And because you saw the results, you see how political parties have engaged with the community, because it didn't behoove them to not engage with that community. So the engagement is up. I'm very mindful of Brampton being 40% South Asian, but 12% Black people. And 12% is, I think we have the largest Jamaican population in all of Canada, which is huge. And the lack of representation at the provincial level, lack of representation at the federal level, municipal level, it's shocking, but it shouldn't be, because we've built in the exclusion. To Evan's point, the first, like, what would a just society, equitable society look like? It's, if you take the holistic approach, I was just reading the folks' comments there. If you take the holistic approach, if we really look, start with yourself, examine yourself, then start questioning, probably at the family level. And if the Green Party is a family, look at processes within your own party, starting there, and then we could build out. I think that's such a huge dream, but we're at the precipice now. I think what COVID has done is laid bare, as we said, the inequities, and we're at that precipice of transformation. I don't know if you know the growth model. Either we're going to decline or transform, and I think this is the opportunity to transform.
Thanks, Sundeep and Velma. I really appreciate your reflections. And Sundeep, it certainly is such a huge undertaking, but I think this is the time for us to be audacious and dare. Anyways, we're going to move on to some questions from you for Mike and our panelists today. So what I invite all of our participants to do is, if you have a question, you could just put it in the chat, and the GPO team here is going to select from those, and I'll bring those forward. While you're thinking of your question, we're going to take a look at one of our pre-submitted questions from online. And that question is, the disparity between white and BIPOC households when it comes to food security has been a lasting issue in Canada. What can be done at a policy level to try to achieve food security among marginalized communities? And I'll hand things over to our panel to respond.
A livable wage, right? I mean, the reason why people don't have, there is a disparity, there's food insecurity in certain communities, because they don't have a livable wage. They have, housing comes first, right? So they need some place to live, so they pay their rent, and then they have no money left over. I see it in the school system a lot. We offer a snack program simply because of that, right? And at the end of the day, depending on what class I have I have kids who want to take the leftovers home because they want to share it, right? They don't have the food. So I think if we were able, policy-wise, if we provided everybody with a livable wage and sick days, that would help eliminate food insecurity in certain communities.
I echo that. I agree. I would also add that I used the term food deserts before. Access to nutritional food, building better. I think building better communities, building more accessible communities. There are some communities in the GTA that are designed to keep people in. If you look at public policy and structure, you can see that they're designed so that folks from that community do not venture out into another. And we have to be honest about that we did that through policy.
Yeah.
And so for any political party to just point to one thing and say, okay, we're going to solve it, it's dishonest. If we're really talking about food insecurity, and to have food insecurity in Canada is shocking. That should shock all of us. The level of food insecurity that is here. 13 million kids in Canada go hungry Like it's not, it's a fixable problem, but it requires us to sit in discomfort, sit in it, lean into it, and then action something out, something that's workable. And it requires listening and being true to ourselves.
Right. So, in certain communities, to your point, there are more fast food outlets than there are grocery stores with fresh food, right? So, if they want fresh food, they have to go further out. Many don't have cars, so you get the fast food and the convenience stores. Again, designed by urban planners, right? Totally designed. To your point, 1 in 6 children in Toronto have food insecurity. I mean, that's something that we shouldn't even be talking about. This is supposed to be rich Toronto. In certain communities, they have several different stores. They have fresh markets out there with different fruits out there. And in the communities that have food insecurity, that's not available.
Hey, Sean, can I jump in on this one? Just given my farm background.
Oh, okay, Mike, I guess so.
If you don't mind, I completely agree with what Velma and Sundeep said about a lot of food security is driven by lack of income. But I also want to say that we've also had a history of land dispossession through colonialism, and Indigenous people in particular have had their land taken. And I can tell you the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, for example, whose treaty land, if you're in Toronto or in Guelph, the two places I spend most of my time, they were amazing farmers. And every time, and their land continually was taken away. I think of the Sikh community in particular, amazing farmers. How much access to land does the community have to grow food? I look at the Black community, amazing history in agriculture. How much access to land? I remember 15, 20 years ago, working to get the African food basket, which is, Anon's a good buddy of mine, Velma, getting Anon access to land to grow food that was culturally appropriate for the Jamaican community. I mean, and so I agree with all the stuff around income, but we also have to think about access to land and access to being able to grow food, and especially food that's culturally appropriate for your particular community.
Thanks so much. I'm recognizing we're very close at our time. We're going to do one last question from Fiona. And Fiona, I'm going to rephrase it very slightly because I just want to make sure we can really address it to the whole panel. So Fiona asks, is there anything that the GPO, or for, if you're not, say, the leader of the party, what can be done to encourage members of the BIPOC community to apply as candidates, particularly the Green Party of Ontario, in 2022? And Fiona has some ideas there, but I'm gonna hand it off to Mike first to get Fiona's GPO focused question first, but then I'll invite Sundeep and Velma to reflect on the wider issue of inclusion and diversity in candidates.
Yeah, well, first of all, I want to say I'm proud we've launched the Take the Lead campaign, which is specifically designed to encourage members of the BIPOC community to run and to try to be transparent, to deal with Velma's point about how to be a candidate. And we're trying to be very proactive in doing that. We've also set up a fund, and we've been working hard to raise money to have a fund for equity deserving candidates, to make sure that the central party is helping to fund those campaigns. And we're also requiring our writing associations, they can't just come to us and say, hey, we have a candidate. We're saying, no. Have you actively recruited equity deserving candidates? You can't just say the first white guy who stepped up to run is your candidate. You have to proactively seek out other candidates. And then the final point, and this is in response to Velma's comments, I wish the Green Party had more winnable ridings. It's a challenge for us right now. And so we're trying to come up with some creative ways of supporting candidates who, because we don't have a lot of winnable ridings, how are other ways we can support those candidates to be successful?
Right. So
thanks, Mike. Yeah, go ahead, Velma. Sorry, I was just.
So I think parties can't wait for candidates to come to them. They have to go to candidates. There was a stats that it takes for a woman to run, you have to ask her 7 times. to run, because she thinks she needs to, you know, her kids have to be growing up. She has to have a certain amount of income. She has to have X, right? As a white male, can have a third of the qualification and will run. You don't even have to do you, and then yes, I'm going to run. So for BIPOC people, it's even more than 7 times to ask, because again, especially as a BIPOC woman, we think that we have to be 3 times, 4 times as to run. So keep asking. And I think parties need to go out and say, okay, is this the person that we want to represent us? And ask that person and tell them that you're going to be supported. This is what, you know, this is what's in it for you. What's in it for me? We get you as a great person, but this is what's in it for you. And support them through the entire process. A lot of us have not been through the process, seen it, but not been through it. And there's so many things that, you know, once you put in your application, the things that you can and cannot do. Do people know that they're supposed to be signing up members, that there's going to be a nomination race? Like, how would they know that if they haven't been part of the process? So they need someone to help guide them through the process.
I agree with that as well, Velma, that the onus rests with the party to engage. So I would even say preceding the ask needs to be authentic engagement with the communities. So someone earlier in the chat box said, even the term BIPOC, to unpack it, because there are differences. There are differences. So how you would engage with certain communities would not be the same way you would engage with other communities. And to have that authentic community outreach and community engagement, to build the relationships, to understand the needs of the community, and how. So I know that each party has their own mandates that are informed by political beliefs, also informed by the membership. If you engage with communities, the mandate will be reflective of those communities, see themselves in the community, and then you would have. I think that would help support the candidate pool. So if you do that in conjunction with being more transparent and having how do you do this more accessible, and then offering support in conjunction with having the mandate and what the values shared and outreach, I think it would just, to the Green Party in general, but all parties across the board, that engagement, it needs to happen, I think, pre-election time. So then you have a pool.
Thank you, Sundeep. I really appreciate all of your responses to that. This is, I'm going to indulge myself with a little comment here. This is something I actually participate in a lot. And one thing I'd also talk about is the important role of mentorship and coaching, so that people feel supported and understand that others are invested in their success. That it's so important, and that sense of safety is that you're not in it alone is so significant. Anyways, thank you to everyone. We're a little bit over time, in fact, which is such a great sign of the amazing conversation engagement we had tonight. I want to say thank you to all of our participants, and just remind you that this is a part of what the Green Party of Ontario is doing as a listening exercise and as an engagement with the community to inform its platform for the election coming up in 2022. So thank you for those great questions, and thank you to everyone for their engagement and time this evening. I'm going to hand things over to Mike to wrap up our time together tonight.
So thank you, Sean, so much for moderating once again. And Velma and Sundeep, thank you so much for taking the time. Your wisdom, your passion, your courage to speak truth to power is so deeply appreciated. And so thank you, thank you, thank you. And I want to say to everyone who's participating is one of the things you can do to help us is we have a diversity and inclusion fund that we are actively raising money for to support equity deserving candidates. And so especially if you are able to contribute to that fund, it would mean a lot to me, and it would mean a lot in our efforts to support BIPOC candidates and candidates from all equity deserving groups. And I really want to encourage people to go check out the Take the Lead campaign, where we're proactively and transparently recruiting and encouraging equity deserving candidates to run for us. And you know, we may not have a lot of winnable ridings, but the one thing we do have is the opportunity to provide you a platform to talk about your vision for Ontario, in our case, your vision for your community, to be passionate about the issues you believe in, and to fight for those issues. And I guarantee you, you're going to have support from me, and you're going to have support from our entire team for your candidacy to be successful. And I think Sundeep was right when she said we need transformative change. And that transformative change can come from your candidacy and you getting elected. And we're going to do everything we can to help make that happen. And Velma, you have your hand up, so go ahead if you want to.
I just want to say one thing. I want to say, I know all of us are at different decision-making tables, and I will challenge you that when you're sitting at any decision table, please look around and see who's missing, and make sure that whoever is missing gets to those decision-making tables, because we know that a diverse decision-making table always makes better decisions for everybody.
I would say ditto, ditto to that.
Thanks so much, everyone. We posted a link to a survey as well. So if you weren't able to share what you were hoping to share, that link is in chat. Maybe we'll just get that put in chat one more time. We have other town halls coming up. We hope you come and participate in those as well. Please fill out the survey. That's really important for us as a party to be have the opportunity to understand your perspective and to earn your support in the next election. Thanks, everyone, and have a great night.
Be well, be safe, everyone.